Hey everybody, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into some legal waters with a case that you sent over, Arnaud of Nimashop, and it's a story about a musician, Mr. Arnaud, and his lawyers, and a whole lot of money. We're talking millions of dollars.
Yeah.
In unpaid music royalty.
Yeah, and this case is really kind of an eye-opener when you look at how easily things can go wrong. Even for someone who wins a huge judgment, you would think that would be the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, he's got his money, but it shows the importance of really understanding your rights, especially when you're dealing with legal representation in contracts.
So let's kind of set the stage here. So Mr. Arnaud, he had originally sued Death Row Records over some unpaid royalties, and he actually won a default judgment for over $25 million. But as you know, getting a judgment and collecting a judgment are two very different things.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. And that's where the lawyers come in. So Mr. Arnaud hired this team of lawyers to help him enforce the judgment. But instead of going after Death Row directly, they took a little detour, a very suspicious detour, into a whole other lawsuit in New York.
And this is where it gets a little tricky, right? The case file mentions something called Organized Crime Family, Inc. I mean, come on. That name alone sends shivers down my spine.
Yeah, I understand why. It turns out that Mr. Arnaud's lawyers got him involved in this New York lawsuit alongside this organization. And as part of a settlement in that lawsuit, they convinced him to sign a release. But here's the catch. That release transferred all of his rights to that $25 million judgment to Organized Crime Family, Inc.
So they basically tricked him into signing away his rights to the money he was owed. This is unbelievable.
It's incredibly shady. But unfortunately, it's not all that uncommon, and that's why it is so important to understand the terms of any legal document you sign. In this case, the release was the key, because it legally allowed for the transfer of Mr. Arnaud's claim to that judgment.
So he won this massive judgment against Death Row, and he ended up with nothing.
It appears that way, at least based on these excerpts. And it really does raise some serious questions about the ethical obligations of the lawyers involved here.
I mean, you would think that lawyers would be required to act in their client's best interest.
Oh, well, you would think that. And generally, that is a fundamental principle of legal ethics. But this case really underscores the potential for conflicts of interest, especially when lawyers are representing multiple parties that might have competing interests.
And there's more, right? The case file also mentions a separate federal lawsuit, and this one involves Tupac Shakur's mother, Afeni Shakur, and some disputes over masked recordings. What's the connection there?
Well, this is where it gets even more tangled, it turns out. That Mr. Arnaud's lawyers were representing Organized Crime Family, Inc. in that federal lawsuit as well. So they were essentially working for both sides. They were working for the organization. That now held the rights to Mr. Arnaud's judgment, and they were also representing the entity that he was indirectly fighting against in the federal case.
Okay, so they not only potentially misled him into signing away his rights, but they were also representing the other side. This is insane. That's a huge conflict of interest. It really makes you wonder if they were ever truly looking out for his interests.
It's a very valid point. This case really makes you think about who they were truly serving in this whole ordeal. And this case really shows why you need to be so cautious when you are choosing your legal representation, especially when you're talking about these large sums of money.
It's really shocking. And I bet some of you out there are thinking, could this happen to me? And the truth is, similar situations do arise, especially in industries like the music industry, where royalty disputes are so common.
Yeah, it's important to be aware of the potential red flags if you're ever in a situation where you feel like your lawyer isn't acting in your best interest, or if you feel pressured to sign something that you don't fully understand. Don't hesitate to get a second opinion.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about music royalties here, right? This applies to any situation where you're dealing with contracts, especially those involving significant financial stakes. Always take the time to read everything carefully, ask questions, and never be afraid to push back if something doesn't feel right.
I completely agree. This case is a stark reminder that legal documents can have really far-reaching consequences, and it highlights the importance of being proactive and being informed.
But wait, there's even more to this story. Mr. Macha, one of the lawyers involved, he tried to pull a fast one by forcing the malpractice case into arbitration. But then he refused to pay his share of the fees, and it completely stalled the whole process. And then things took a really unexpected turn.
Oh boy, what happened?
He declared bankruptcy, hoping to wipe the slate clean, including the debts related to the malpractice lawsuit. But as we'll see in part 2, it wasn't that simple.
I can't wait to hear what happened.
This is a case that just keeps on giving. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll uncover what happened next and explore the legal complexities of bankruptcy and how they impacted Mr. Arnaud's fight for justice. Welcome back, everybody. So we're picking up where we left off. Mr. Michow, one of the lawyers in this crazy case, he had just declared bankruptcy, hoping that would somehow magically erase all of his legal troubles.
It really makes you wonder, can you really just declare bankruptcy and get rid of debts like that?
That was my first thought, too. Especially when you're talking about debts. That could be linked to something as serious as malpractice. It can't be that easy.
Oh, yeah. Bankruptcy laws are designed to give people a fresh start. But it's not a free pass. There are certain types of debts that are typically not dischargeable in bankruptcy, meaning they can't just be wiped away.
And that includes debts that are incurred through fraudulent activities, right? Which seems to be a key issue in this case.
You got it. Remember how? Mr. Arnaud was allegedly misled about the consequences of that release he signed and how his lawyers were potentially operating with a major conflict of interest.
Yeah, so basically the court was saying, nice try, Mr. Machet, but you can't just escape accountability by filing for bankruptcy, especially if there's potential fraud involved.
That's exactly right. The court ultimately ruled that those debts related to the malpractice case were not going to be discharged. Through the bankruptcy filing, they saw right through it. It was clearly an attempt to evade responsibility.
So it seems like Mr. Machet's plan backfired in a big way, and there's another detail in the case files that really struck me as particularly sneaky.
What's that?
Well, when Mr. Machet filed for bankruptcy, he conveniently forgot to include Mr. Arnaud on his list of creditors.
Oh, wow.
It seems like a blatant attempt to keep Mr. Arnaud in the dark and prevent him from challenging the attempt to discharge the debt.
Yeah, that omission was a major red flag for the court. It meant that Mr. Arnaud wasn't properly notified about the bankruptcy proceedings and had no chance to object to Mr. Machet's attempt to wipe away the debt that he owed him.
And this is a crucial point for anyone out there listening. If you're ever named as a creditor in someone's bankruptcy case, make sure you understand your rights and take the necessary steps to protect your interests.
Absolutely. Don't just ignore those notices. You have the right to participate in the process.
Right.
And make sure your claim is properly addressed.
So back to the case. The court's decision to vacate the order for arbitration because of that bankruptcy filing and because of the potential for fraud, that was a huge win for Mr. Arnaud, wasn't it?
It was a major victory. The court recognized that Mr. Machet wasn't playing fair, and they took action to prevent him from further manipulating the legal system to his advantage.
I mean, this case, it's full of twists and turns. It makes you wonder if justice delayed is truly justice denied.
It's a valid concern. And unfortunately, legal battles can drag on for years, especially when tactics like these are employed to delay the process.
But for Mr. Arnaud, this ruling meant that the malpractice case could finally move forward, right?
That's right. It cleared the way for him to finally have his day in court and seek accountability for the alleged wrongdoing by his lawyers.
But there's one big question that's still looming. Did he ever actually get the money he was owed? That $25 million judgment against Death Row Records?
That's what we all want to know, right?
And this is where the case files you provided kind of leave us hanging. The excerpts don't detail the outcome of that original lawsuit. So frustrating.
It just goes to show that legal battles can be incredibly complex and very unpredictable. Even when you win key rulings along the way, there's no guarantee of a clean and satisfying ending.
It's a reminder that the legal system is often about navigating a series of hurdles and fighting for every inch of progress. But even without knowing the final outcome of the lawsuit, we can still learn a lot from this case. And that's what we'll focus on as we head into the final part of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it.
Great. I'm ready to unpack those key takeaways and explore what they mean for anyone navigating the complexities of legal representation, contracts, and even bankruptcy. Stick around, because this deep dive is far from over.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this really wild legal saga. We've seen how Mr. Arnaud's quest to collect his $25 million judgment took some pretty unexpected turns involving shady settlements, potential conflicts of interest, and even a bankruptcy filing that backfired.
It's really quite a story. And while the case files that you sent over don't really reveal the ultimate outcome of that original lawsuit against Death Row Records, this case still offers some valuable lessons, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the biggest things you think we can all kind of learn from Mr. Arnaud's experience? What should our listeners really be thinking about, especially if they ever find themselves in a similar situation. Well, I think first and foremost, this case is a cautionary tale about choosing your legal representation very carefully. You're entrusting your lawyer with your legal rights and potentially your financial well-being. It's not something to take lightly.
It's a big deal. Yeah, you can't just assume that all lawyers are going to automatically act in your best interest. This case really highlights the importance of doing your research and asking the right questions before you sign on that dotted line.
I couldn't agree more. Don't just go with the first lawyer you find or the one that seems the most charismatic. Take some time to vet them thoroughly.
Yeah.
Check their credentials, their experience in the specific area of law that you need help with, and look for any red flags.
Like what kind of red flags? What are some signs? That should make people pause and reconsider.
Well, a big one is if a lawyer seems expectant, overly eager to get you to sign a contract without really fully explaining the terms, or if they just dismiss your concerns or brush off your questions.
Basically, if your gut is telling you something is off, you should listen to it. Don't be afraid to walk away and find someone that you feel more comfortable with.
Absolutely. You need to feel confident that your lawyer understands your needs and will advocate for your best interests. And remember, you're the client. You have the right to ask questions. You have the right to push back. And you have the right to seek a second opinion if something doesn't feel right.
This case also highlights the importance of really understanding any contract or legal document before you sign it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that release that Mr. Arnaud signed ended up having huge consequences. Read every single word. If there's anything that you don't understand, ask for clarification.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to have another lawyer. Review the documents, especially if it's a really complex agreement or involves a lot of money.
Knowledge is your best defense in these situations. The more you understand about your rights, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself.
That's the bottom line.
And this case also touched on another complex area that we should all be aware of. Bankruptcy. It's not a simple process. And it doesn't always work the way people assume it might.
Yeah, Ms. Machot's attempt to use bankruptcy as a shield definitely backfired. It's a good reminder that certain debts, especially those related to fraud, aren't so easily erased.
So the key takeaway here is to be informed, to be proactive, and to never be afraid to ask for help if you need it.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Mr. Arnaud's story, even without knowing the final resolution, is a powerful reminder that the legal system can be a complex and sometimes treacherous landscape, but with the right knowledge and the right approach, you can navigate it more effectively and protect your interests.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating case, what's the one piece of advice you would give our listeners based on everything we've talked about today?
I would say this. When it comes to legal matters, don't be passive. Be informed, be engaged, and be your own advocate. Ask questions, do your research, and don't be afraid to seek professional guidance when you need it.
Great advice. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about legal issues, contracts, or even bankruptcy, remember you can always reach out to us with your questions and thoughts using the show's hashtag. We love hearing from you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.